There are still 58 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, and the latest plan to get them home has fallen short. Over the weekend, Israel agreed to a U.S.-backed ceasefire deal that would have required Hamas to free a number of hostages. The White House says instead of an agreement from Hamas, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff got a new proposal from the group with demands which he calls completely unacceptable. Hamas now says it wants a new round of talks, and if it's going to release anyone, it would be a staggered approach as to not give Israel any military advantage. And here on the home front, another attack on the Jewish community, this time in Boulder, Colorado, where a man threw a Molotov cocktail into a crowd of people as they gathered to draw awareness to the hostages who are still being held in Gaza. The suspect crying out, "Free Palestine." And while these attacks of violence seek to silence their voices, we are seeking to amplify the message of the innocent tonight. Joining me now is a family member of one of those hostages who is actively being held in captivity by Hamas. I want to welcome in Moshe Lavi. He is the brother-in-law of Omri Miran, who was kidnapped from his home on October 7th. Moshe, thank you so much for taking time to be with us this evening, and our hearts go out to you and your family. As every night, I know I can only imagine it would be hard to know where your brother-in-law is. You know, he was kidnapped in front of your sister, his wife, and their two small children, now over 20 months ago. You know, those who are seeking to draw attention to his life are being targeted and attacked. The suspect in Colorado telling them that they are killers, one of whom was actually a Holocaust survivor, which you've heard now. Moshe, what is your message tonight to those who are seeking to silence those standing up for people like your brother?
Thank you for having me, and I want to send my condolences and message of support and love to those who stood with us for the past 20 months, marching and rallying for our families, for Omri, and for all the hostages, whether in Boulder, Colorado, and across the country. What I have to say to any perpetrator of such domestic terrorism and those who think about committing such heinous acts in the future, we will not be silenced. We'll continue to march for our loved ones held captive by an Islamist terrorist organization. We're going to keep voicing our pain, sharing their stories, and emphasizing that in order to end the conflict in the Gaza Strip and in Israel, we need to see the unconditional release of all the hostages and Hamas laying down their arms, surrendering, and exiting on exile the Gaza Strip.
You know, Moshe, we saw two Israeli embassy workers just about 2 weeks ago get brutally murdered here in our nation's capital. So now we have two incidents targeting Jews on American soil. As you know, the U.S. has the second largest population of Jews in the world next to Israel. How is the Jewish community feeling right now? Are you all feeling safe?
I don't think we feel safe, whether here in the U.S. and, to be honest, across many other Western countries. You know, you mentioned two incidents, but there was actually a third in Michigan, where a man was apprehended before he committed a massacre in a Jewish daycare, trying to murder children. Luckily, he was stopped. And there are many other lone terrorists like that who will continue to plan those kind of acts. We see the virulent and toxic discourse on social media promoted by what I call the green, red, brown shirt coalition of anti-Semites, people from the radical right, the radical left, and Islamists who live in this country. We see toxic rhetoric on the streets by demonstrators who should exercise the right for freedom of speech, but should not do it in hateful manner, should not engage in hate speech. And that hate speech is eventually translated to violence and physical attacks against Jews. I don't feel safe, but I'll continue to do what I can to advocate for my brother-in-law in New York and across the country. I march as well every Sunday here in New York or in other cities where I travel in order to share Omri's story. And I will continue to do that. But the Jewish community is in pain, in agony since October the 7th. And of course, given all these horrific attacks, the murder of the two innocent employees of the embassy who were there in a conference of how to better the situation in Gaza. And of course, those who were attacked yesterday, including a Holocaust survivor who survived the Nazis only to be burned by a terrorist here in the US.
When speaking to the White House today, we played the clip earlier, the administration saying that they fully support the Jewish community and they will do whatever it takes to protect you all. If you could speak to the president today, what message would you send him about getting your brother-in-law home and what they need to do to protect your community this evening?
When it comes to the hostage crisis, what we continue to emphasize to policymakers, and I do those trips to DC like many other families of the hostages, we try and share with them who are these hostages. Omri, a healer, a shiatotherapist, a gardener, a lover of sports, nature, humanity, a father to two beautiful daughters, my nieces Roni and Alma, and devoted husband to my sister Lishai. We try to emphasize the sort of life these people lost as a result of the October 7th attack. And we want to ensure that they understand that every decision they make, whether here in the US, whether policymakers in Israel and worldwide, they have to take into account the human beings who are suffering as a result of the ongoing conflict. And we ask them to continue pressuring the nefarious actors that sponsor Hamas, countries like Qatar, Iran, Turkey, because they hold the key to release our loved ones. And when it comes to the second point, the Jewish community, I applaud the administration for taking a strong stance ever since President Trump came into office. I think they've been doing a tremendous job in protecting Jewish communities, in ensuring that they are embracing Jews across the country. But more needs to be done. We need to ensure that communities are being protected. We need to ensure that toxic discourse is being monitored and that people like the alleged assailant yesterday, who has been for a year threatening to kill Jews in Colorado and tried to obtain a gun. Luckily he didn't, but eventually used a Molotov cocktail to do that, to do the attack. He's been doing it for a year, planning it for a year. If it was monitored better, perhaps the consequences would have been different. And I hope policymakers understand in this country, for both parties, we don't want cheap words. The Jewish citizens of the US and residents of the US want action, want to make sure that this is a priority. And also, it's not about protecting only Jews. It's protecting the entire, all other communities who are under threat by this sort of terrorism, whether hate speech or actually physical violence.
Moshe Lavi, really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for sharing your voice, and we lift up your brother-in-law, Omri Miran, tonight. We remember him, and we hope that he comes back to you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Amen.